Good day. Thank you for joining us for our Heritage Month webinar series 2022. We are now in day 3 of our webinar series, and we will be having a presentation from SAHRA's Burial Grounds and Graves Unit. The presentation today will be delivered by Mr. Ngabuto Madida, who is the acting manager for the Burial Grounds and Graves Unit. He has a very engaging and exciting talk that relates to desecration of sacred sites. Before we begin, we're going to move to a message of welcome from the SAHRA CEO, Advocate Lungisa Malkas. Thank you.
Good day, my name is Lungisa Malkas. I'm the CEO of the South African Heritage Resources Agency. Thank you all for joining us today as we celebrate the unique and diverse heritage of the country we call home. We are honored and humbled to have you as our guests. We are further honored to take this opportunity to share and celebrate the many areas of our cultural heritage resources with our community as we celebrate Heritage Month 2022. We are extremely diverse society with many layers in our heritage landscape, and we acknowledge that the greatest part about our heritage is this diversity. We are a nation of 11 official languages that also celebrates other languages commonly used by our international friends and visitors. We are also a nation that celebrates the indigenous languages of the First Nations that originated in our beautiful land. We come from a painful past which will forever be tainted by the legacy of apartheid and colonialism, which is why our heritage is so extremely important to us. Our heritage is a source of identity and cohesion for our nation. It makes us who we are. It shapes and molds us and gives us a sense of belonging. It is a story for all our children to share irrespective of their differences. It is passed down from generation to generation, linking the present to the past. Our heritage finds expression in our rituals, food, music, art, and our significant sites and objects. This is what makes South Africa a magnificent space. We are home to the most beautiful sites, objects, dating back prehistorical times, which opens a window into lives of the earliest ancestors of our humankind. Our indigenous knowledge systems, which have been preserved by our elders and traditional healers, are also a vital part of our heritage. This year's Heritage Month webinar series is taking place in the shadow of COVID-19, which has taken massive toll on human life, on our communities, and on our economy. As the world recovers from the battle against COVID-19, we are encouraged by the united global effort to beat the virus. It shows that through collaboration and cooperation, we can achieve and overcome anything on this planet, which is why we are taking this year's Heritage Month webinar as an opportunity for us to collaborate and build a global network of partners that will assist us in developing a world-class heritage sector in South Africa. I thank you.
Following that lovely address from our CEO, I will now be handing over to the acting manager of SAHRA's Burial Ground and Grave Unit, Ngabuto Matita, to present his talk on the desecration of sacred spaces. Over to you, Matita.
Good afternoon, colleagues and guests to this afternoon presentation. Am I audible, Mr. Mosinga?
Yes, you are loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me just put up this presentation and see if we can share the screen. Is this presentation visible to everyone?
Yes, it is visible. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. As Mr. Mosinga has indicated, my name is Ngalabuto Matita. I am the acting manager for burial grounds and graves at the South African Heritage Resources Agency. We are based in Pretoria, and where there is a satellite office for SAHRA. I know that the unit, this particular unit within SAHRA, has earned the infamous name as the Undertakers, and I promise that I will not do any such undertaking for this meeting, for this presentation. I will just take you through about some of the challenges that we have experienced in the work of conserving graves. And at the end, ask some questions for which I don't have answers, but maybe those that are here could engage with those questions and see whether there are ideas and pointers that we can find at the end to assist us in our work. By way of introduction, graves are an important part of our national estate, and therefore we have a duty to, in line with the National Heritage Resources Act, identify, document, and conserve this for posterity. In terms of the National Heritage Resources Act, graves that are older than 60 years are considered as part of the national estate. And by national estate, we mean they are considered as part of heritage resources on the broad spectrum of heritage resources that must be conserved. So SAHRA is therefore mandated to conserve those graves. I've just taken some extracts, I think there'll be 4 of them, just to give you sections of the Act that may assist on where to refer to. We are enjoined that way it's not the responsibility of any other authority. SAHRA must conserve and generally care for burial grounds and graves that are protected in terms of this section, that is section 36. Now, those graves are further elucidated here that we must identify and record graves of victims of conflict and graves which SAHRA deems to be of cultural significance, and we may erect memorials that are associated with the graves. So now, in the victims of conflict section, it talks about people who died in all the conflicts that have ensued in the Republic. as far back as we can research and determine. So those graves are to be conserved for posterity. But also the mandate extends beyond just the Republic's borders. It also extends to graves of victims of conflict that are outside the Republic. And SAHRA is empowered to perform functions of a provincial heritage resources authority in order to conserve those particular graves. Further, the Act also regulates basically how that should be done, and we are here given that without a permit that's issued by SAHRA, no person may, or a provincial heritage resources authority, no person may destroy, damage, alter, exhume, or remove from its original position, or otherwise disturb any grave or burial ground older than 60 years, which is situated outside a formal cemetery. So that is the sort of broad, really brush sweep of the mandate that is given by the Act in as far as the conservation of graves are concerned. Then there are specific categories of graves that are outlined in the Act. Did I hear some feedback? No?
Apologies. Could you please switch off your microphones as you enter the meeting? Please make sure your mics are switched off. Thank you, Matida. Please continue.
Okay, thank you, Ben. These are the categories of graves that are highlighted in Section 3 of the National Heritage Resources Act. So, ancestral graves, royal graves and graves of traditional leaders, graves of victims of conflict, historical cemeteries, other graves that are not covered by the Human Tissue Act, and graves of individuals designated by the minister through a notice in the Government Gazette. Now, those graves that are younger than 60 years would be covered by the Human Tissue Act. And that, I think, that would help us on that particular point. So broadly, these are the categories of graves that the NARA protects. Now, having determined the different types of or categories of graves that are protected by the NARA, but also the same Act gives us our marching orders in terms of memorialization. And I bring memorialization here broadly, particularly because it's important as far as it relates to victims of conflict and other graves of cultural significance, because this is where part of our talk is going to be focused on. We are enjoined to identify, record, etc. But then it says we may erect memorials associated with the graves. And in the picture there, the grave of Rahima Musa, which was done in consultation with the family of Rahima Musa. Section 44 as well of the National Heritage Resources Act also enjoins heritage resources authorities and local authorities to coordinate and promote the presentation of and use of places of cultural significance and heritage resources, including the erection of memorials, etc. So it is within that broad context that SAHRA has projects that it embarks on to memorialize, whether it's graves of traditional leaders, it's graves of victims of conflict, and even in some cases, people that are missing, and where they have not been found for one reason or another, whether they were in the liberation struggle or they were in any other wars. So we do that. We do refurbishment, upgrade, and erect memorials that speak to this particular section of the Act. I'm sure that other units also do the same in other spheres that they are they find their marching orders from. There's a quotation here by Sabine Marshall on how to honor a woman, and on this you can perhaps find this particular book. It says How to Honor a Woman, Gendered Memorialization in Post-Apartheid South Africa. It says after 1994, the democratically elected post-apartheid government began to redress the biased landscape of memory inherited from the previous order by establishing a host of new memorials commemorating new heroes and previously neglected perspectives of the past. So there is this effort, rather, that there was a need to forge a new national identity that acknowledges our past, but also enables us to grapple with our past, painful past. And part of that involves the bringing into the landscape of memory, as she puts it, new memorials that would speak to an inclusive democratic dispensation. There's another quotation which I've kept as well, from Landscape of Memory, Commemorative Monuments, Memorials and Public Statuary, pages 2 to 3. It says here, new monuments and statues are necessary to tell the other side of the story, to expose suppressed histories and preserve narratives of the previously written out of the official historical record, to counter biased interpretations disseminated through the existing symbolic landscape. And so, as you can see from this loaded statement, there's already contestation, right, between the past and the present and the new that comes onto the symbolic landscape of this new nation that is still finding its feet in terms of developing its democratic order. Now, memorialization is important in these ways. It helps the society to deal, or the country to deal with a conflictive past. It forges a national identity and contributes to the rebuilding of a society that has been devastated by conflict. And we've been through that in this country, where there are still unresolved issues brought about by both colonialism and the apartheid state. And then also keeping alive lessons which, if ignored, could hamper social stability, constructive engagement with the past and the future. And I think part of why I'm particularly point 3 is very important is that this keeping alive of lessons can happen in many ways. It can happen through education, research, publication, but it also happens through memorialization. Now, the question perhaps is, once these memorials, which are part of the broader spectrum of keeping social stability and having constructive engagement with the present and the past and the future as well, if these are being desecrated, what does that mean for the upcoming generations? What does that mean for the present generations? So it's important to have those structures so that a community's violent past can contribute to building a culture of respect for human rights and peaceful resolution of conflicts. Now, here are some of the sort of collage of pictures before I sort of zoom into the desecration, particularly of graves. Here are some of the heritage sites that have been constructed to create that dialogue or engagement with our past in the present and what that means perhaps for our future, which have been vandalized by communities. And these are memorials that were not built by sort of the apartheid government to commemorate its power and carry forward its memory, but these are memorials that were built to commemorate some of the pain that the people have gone through and where we are today. So what you see on your top left is a memorial that was built to commemorate the frontier wars. It is in Grahamstown. And what basically happened there is that the community went into that particular area and they destroyed it, as you can see it. The granite stones that had been used as finishing as you ascend the steps were removed and taken, and the bricks, the face brick structure that had been built there had the bricks taken. So what you're seeing there is basically fragments of what's left of the bricks. Otherwise, the bricks were really taken out. And then, of course, on the bottom left, what you're seeing there is the floor of that same memorial having been sort of vandalized during the vandalism, and it has greatly weakened its structure. Some of the flooring, as you can see there, was removed. It is not edging, it was basically removal of that. Now, on the sort of top right, what you're seeing there is the Langan Memorial that is in Uitenhage, and the picture as well on the bottom right is still the same area. What you're seeing there is that the paving on the bottom right picture had been removed and packed for transportation, as you can see on the site itself. So there seems to be this there seems to be the much more generalized vandalism that seems to be going into memorial sites and other heritage sites, be they local, provincial, and otherwise. And I think that I'm saying that because it's important to then contextualize the vandalism of graves within the broader context that's already happening of the desecration of graves in general. Here are some of the sites, and then I think, as I said, I will pose the questions at the end, and then we can have an engagement on how this could be resolved, or maybe find a way in which this can be balanced. This is a grave of Reverend Mahabane in the Free State. It's in Kronstadt at a municipal cemetery. It's a historic cemetery. It's an old cemetery. This grave was declared as a National Heritage Site, and subsequently the work of rehabilitation was done on the site. So what you're looking at there is the picture of the work that was completed on the Reverend Mahabane site. I believe this was around 2016 or thereabout. This year we received a call that the site had been desecrated. The picture that you see on the right basically shows what the site was as of January 2022, right? Strangely enough, while we were here 30 minutes ago, we received a call from a family member from that same site. The poles that you see there have also been removed now. And we got this call today, just about 30 or so minutes ago. So even what's left of the steel that you see there to protect the site is now gone, has been removed. And I remember speaking to my colleagues saying that what you see, what is left of the site, we would be lucky if that still stands by the end of the year. And my sense of fear has come true, particularly on the site. And I still insist that the paving that you see around the site would be lucky to remain. What does this mean? Because consultations with local heritage authorities was done, the community was involved, the families were involved. Now, this creates difficult questions in terms of memorialization, going forward, and ways that we may think we would like to engage with them with this particular aspect of the mandate of memorialization. It is important, it must be done, but how do we then take it forward? So yeah, that's just the same site. The site that you're looking at as well here is Gopane. It's in the northwest, in the village of Gopane. Now, the 4 people were killed in the 1950s, the rural rebellion of the 50s, and they were shot dead by the security forces then. But only one was found, but the other 3, their graves were not found. So a memorial was done to sort of to keep their memory alive and the events surrounding that particular rural resistance. Now, the picture on the left, is the memorial itself after having been completed. But the picture on the right, subsequently, a fence was put around it, and there was a gate. So the gate has been taken away, it has been removed, and this particular memorial site is now really vulnerable. What you do not see on your right, and I did not have the pictures to put it until sometime today, is the hall, community hall, that has been absolutely vandalized, and it's still a solid structure, but the hall itself has been vandalized. You may see that the memorial is covered, and there are questions about failure of local authorities to take this particular project forward. And maybe those are questions we could look at. And then then there are concentration camp cemeteries that we do. We rehabilitate those. Those are campsites that date back to the Anglo-Boer War or the South African War. This is one of the sites where we intervened. If you look at the picture that's on the left, you have that metal there. That's where the corner of the cemetery was, but you had vehicles driving over the cemetery. And then when we intervened and put bollards to stop vehicles, you can see that the land has self-rehabilitated there. And then this is another one. This is in KwaZulu-Natal, Mirribank Concentration Camp Memorial Garden. If you look at the picture that's on the left, the steel gate was there when we did an inspection. I believe it was 2016, 2017. But as of this year, the picture on the right shows you that the steel gate is gone. It has been removed. And that site has basically become a place where, if you are not brave enough during the day to go and visit the site, it may freak you out. There are people that sleep there and so forth. And it's a little bit closed. Here is another site as well. You will begin to see a pattern. This is the Jacobs Concentration Camp Memorial. This was when it was a sort of around 2017, 2016. It was fenced properly, and the picture on the right shows you what has happened to the fence. The fence has basically been removed, and it has disappeared. And you can see the dumping that's happening very close to the site, beginning to encroach on the site. Here is another one. I think this is a little bit more extreme, though. At the Belfast Concentration Camp Cemetery in Mpumalanga, there was actually an exhumation, and no one knows who dug up the human remains from that particular site. And as you can see, the date here was 2017. When we went for that inspection, this had been dug out. Human remains had been dug out from the site deliberately, and it was left as is. Who did it? It's still a bit difficult to establish. And then you have this particular site that we declared, as some of my colleagues will remember, Chief Charlie. It's in the Eastern Cape. It was declared, and that's when it was first identified in the forest, in the open area towards Alice. That's after the work was done and completed. However, what has begun to happen, what began to happen around the site is that in what I term in recreational use of grave sites, you had people using that site, visiting the site, drinking and having, I don't know whether there were parties and eating there, but also, the people were hanky-pankying around the site. You could see that it was all over the place. When we visited the site in this year, we found that the site had been closed off to the public, including the signage that was pointing to the grave. It had been removed. Perhaps it was to prevent that kind of activity from happening. But what it has effectively done is that it has removed from the public consciousness the location of the grave and those that may want to visit that particular space. And then you have challenges in farms. As you can see here, this is in a farming area. This was a farm. There was some mealies there. Someone came and without following compliance that is due, exhumed human remains, desecrated this particular grave and left it in its current state, as you can see the pictures. Now, when this was reported to us, obviously it was now post the fact. So clearly these are graves that are protected in terms of the law. These are graves of cultural significance. They are older than 60 years and so forth. So these are graves that are really protected in terms of the NARA. And someone did not follow the law, they just did it. Now, the difficulty is that obviously when this cultivation happens, for you to be able to find this gravesite, you must really, it would take a while or take someone with the knowledge of the area to be able to show you the area. Then this is another one where we had to go and listen to the community and the landowner. And that this person had basically plowed over the graves of these families, and they could not connect to where the graves were. For a time, they had been able to, they were given access, but when the son took over from the father, the son did not have the same kind of sort of respect for the graves as the father did, and these graves were damaged. And some of the graves there are protected by the Act. They are over 60 years, some of them into up to 100 years. And here are some of the things that I perhaps was thinking about. That what are the possible reasons, perhaps, in trying to understand why people would go into sacred spaces such as graves and others and destroy. There are those that have advanced the argument about imported religions or cultural beliefs, and that where traditional beliefs are undermined by belief systems from other parts of the world, it then creates this tension where those that do not have respect for those cultural beliefs tend to look down on the belief system of others, and then therefore they desecrate the graves. I think a study was done by, I just forget the name, particularly in Nigeria and Cameroon. This is a prevalent practice. And I guess the question is that, is this the case here in South Africa? And then they also advanced the argument of Western education. And their argument is that Western education tends to be more individual and less communal, whereas belief systems, African belief systems, were more communal. And so sacred spaces had a sort of collective, in quotes, memory, and therefore their preservation was done by the community, whereas this one is seen as individual. Maybe that type of education has filtered into conservation, and as a result, people no longer have the same respect. And then modernism and urbanism, if you look at some of the sites that I've given you an example of, with the exception of the ones that are on the farms, they are very close to urban areas of settlement where you've got townships, you've got other areas of settlement as well, but it's not exclusively townships. But I think my experience from the little ones that I've seen, for example, the Mahabane example and the one in the Eastern Cape as well, they are closely linked to where people live. And then maybe there's the argument that economic development also might influence that. You can see that, for example, with the farming example, but also the mines, who are very big culprits on this particular issue. That economic development seems to also influence the destruction. And then there's a term which I became aware of, and I found, but I liked, let me say, the description. Iconoclasm. I don't know whether I'm saying it right. I like this definition that says destruction of icons due to the belief that images that are that images are imbued with unacceptable symbolic significance. That as society changes its priorities, as people shift, as the younger generations come, they may not have the same values as the older ones, and therefore some of the symbols that people hold in high regard and in reverence, that may go away, and as a result, result in their possible destruction. I think in the last two or three slides, that what are the possible reasons, specifically for South Africa? I think those were more general reasons that I gave in the previous slide. The one which is really itching, I think, is economic priorities, especially if you look at the local municipalities. The conservation of even national heritage sites and some of the memorials that are done are really at the bottom of their priorities. And as a result, I think that's what I'm thinking, and I may be wrong on this one, and this platform can ventilate that. That they don't prioritize that. And then you have institutional failures at local government level. That in some of the projects, we have worked with the local municipalities. They support the projects that we do. And then when it comes to looking after that infrastructure, when it is done and completed, such as in the Mahabane case, or even in the Khopane 4 case, they simply do not step up, and local municipalities here would be at the coalface of trying to assist in making sure that the sites are conserved and not vandalized. If you look at the site of Mahabane, it's at a local cemetery that's being looked after by the local municipality. If you look at the Khopane case, it's next to a hall, right? A community hall, which is literally a stone's throw from there. The community hall is also vandalized, and that means that the memorial itself, despite being located at a center that is accessible to the public, will itself suffer the same. And then we've had a debate here with my colleague in the office on the issue of poverty, that when you look at the vandalism, it's stuff that is taken for sale. People remove the protection, which is the fencing, and they take that and take it for sale. And they make a living out of it. But there's also criminality that is happening. That you have criminals that identify these spaces and give their runners in order to make sure that these places are taken and they benefit from it. I guess the question that I've been struggling with, and this is where maybe the debate would come in, is this issue of whether we are at a point as a society where our belief system or the memorials we construct to remember the past are outliving their symbolic significance, such that our communities are beginning to see them as items that can be destroyed. And I think that that's a question that I'm saying I've been grappling with, and maybe people can engage on that. And then lastly, the title of this was, is it time for a conversation? Is it time for us as a nation to engage with this particular issue of the destruction of graves and sites of cultural significance? on a much more broader scale. I'm not just talking about having workshops, I'm talking about trying to understand some of the driving factors and things that have resulted in sort of in where we are. And I'm asking here rhetorically, should we employ guards? How many will you employ to look after those sites? Should we have more stricter legislation with heavier penalties for offenders? Will that help? Is that the way to go? And then, is this a case of colliding and conflicting worldviews of belief systems, modernity, etc., urbanization, and so on? And if it is, how do we go back to try and see that the element of respect for those sites is restored? How can protection of a grave be infused in economic priorities of local state institutions? I think that's another question. How is it that I can go to a local municipality in Khalakwena, wherever, and make this issue of protection of graves part of that local municipality or district municipality or local authorities' priority? Because if it's not infused in that, I think that it then creates this gap where people desecrate the sites for economic benefits. How do we make them see the benefit? Is that even a way? And then the last one is criminality related to theft or vandalism of graves? Is criminality that is related to theft or vandalism of graves a reflection of something deeper, whatever that something is, in the thinking patterns of our communities? I think that's a difficult one to grapple with. Some of you perhaps, well, I don't know, but let me put it this way. Generally, there has been this culture of respect of a place of burial as sacred, and going to play around that particular space was something that was frowned upon across communities, across belief systems. What I'm saying is that, are we beginning to move beyond that? And what are the implications if we are? And I think this is something that we need to grapple with. Yeah, I thank you for listening to this presentation. I hope that we can have some engagements on it. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Madida. If you could please keep the second last slide on.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Yeah, let's make it large. What I can say about this particular talk today is that the chat has been lit. You have set the chat on fire, and I'm sure there's a lot of input that you're going to get from our guests here today. So firstly, from my side, this is a very fascinating conversation, and it speaks to the general management of sites, especially those that are isolated and those that may not have a connection with the communities in which they are found. So you have a lot of comments in the chat. I'm gonna start with Ms. Claudia Frattini, who has asked and made a lot of comments. She's asked a lot of questions. Perhaps Ms. Frattini, you would like to come on and speak directly to Madida. Please go ahead, Ms. Frattini.
Yes, I will. Please excuse the noise in the background. I'm sharing an office with a colleague right now.
No problem.
It's very interesting, and I think what Madida has pointed out, it's something deeper. It definitely is something deeper, and I think a greater awareness to this needs to be created. How one creates this awareness is yet another question.
Okay.
In many respects, there is no knowledge of the history. There is the minute I know the history, the minute I know the significance of a site, I can connect with it. and gain a respect for it. I was quite interested in the slides that the earliest slides where the possible causes for this were listed. Modernization, urbanization. That's very, yes, that one there, perfect. And I think that is symptomatic all over the world. I don't think it's specifically a South African problem. I think we see it more in South Africa because the history has been eroded and there is no engagement on a grassroots level with that. It's all fine and well that we sit in our ivory towers at universities in various departments and, you know, ruminate about these questions, when the problem is actually at grassroots level. What is the history that our children are being taught? What are they being taught? How are they engaging with that part of their cultural history? Because if I don't know why I have to respect something, I'm not going to respect it. I'm putting aside the general idea of lawlessness and unaccountability that is inextricably linked to this. Because if I'm not going to be taken to account and I'm not going to be taken to boot on perpetrating these acts, then what's the point? Then I can do what I want. So discipline, I think discipline and knowledge breed respect, foresights.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ms.
I don't know if I've said as much as I could in the chat as well, and thank you for giving me the platform.
Thank you for your input. It is truly invaluable. Madida, a response to Ms. Frattini?
Yes, thank you for that input. I think it is also, I agree with her on this part where we are saying that there seems to be something deeper happening, more than just sort of criminality and poverty. I mean, there seems to be, I think, either a shift in values, a shift in the system, where those that are engaging in these acts of vandalizing, particularly these sites, have accepted a different value system or are initiating a different value system. And I think that's where the engagement, particularly in what I was afraid to put here, sort of the psyche of the nation, in as far as this is concerned. You know, where is the psyche of the nation, the deeper part of the nation? How are people thinking, the patterns of life and behavior, etc., as far as it relates to this particular issue? And I think that our educational institutions may be a starting point. I know that students say that history is boring and other things are boring, and so when you put up perhaps a memorial such as that, and then a young child might say, "Who is Mahabane? Why is he here?" You know, so I think that maybe there has to be an infusion into our system where heritage is not discovered by accident by children, but it is actually brought up. So I don't know how we can make, as some historians say, heritage and history a little bit more sexy and attractive, so that the young ones can then pick it up and maybe try and correct this. Because if it's not dealt with in that way, if you can't change maybe the thinking, it's difficult to then just root out the behavior. So I definitely thank her for that valuable input. I haven't been able to see the comments. I will see them, and then maybe I will respond and put my email there as well. Yeah.
Please go ahead and put your email now, and I'm going to go through the other comments, because we had a number of comments as well as from the colleagues from HWC. We have Wasifa Danse here. Wasifa, I'm not sure if you are able to, but you've made a lot of interesting comments around landowners not valuing the graves, proactive approach versus reactive approach. Perhaps you can just give us a little bit more input, Wasifa, if you are able to. Go ahead.
Hi, Ben. Thank you for the platform and this interesting chat that we're having now. Yeah, just from an administrative point of view, like from our experiences at HWC, when we get these queries about desecration of unknown or unmarked burials, and that it's more farmers who instinctively just go ahead and plow, and we get to site the day or two later, and the human remains are unfortunately desecrated. And at that point, it's hard to do trace analysis to discover who does the lineage lie with, and there is no record keeping. It's an isolated grave, and that. So there's a lot of problems with informing the landowners in terms of what their rights are and their roles. Because when we're doing the NIDs, we say no further studies, but if there are graves to be discovered, please inform us. I've never been told when we've done that to actually tell us that we've discovered a grave. It's really when it's word of mouth via the public or workers on the farm who sees the activities going on, then they alert us. But it's also on the sideline. They're very hesitant to alert us. They'd give it 100 rand and be quieted down on the other side. So there is just this information sharing that needs to happen. Maybe this is a broader heritage one, because we're not given the approvals for those cultivations, and that it's DEDP and environmental affairs who actually do that. So more of a monitoring role needs to take place. And yeah, our inventory of unmarked grave, it's very hard to localize it from that perspective. But yeah, and then just to touch on this, the value-based system of graves. The city of Cape Town, I know, is struggling. We just met with them last week with their graves in general. The desecration doesn't have to be archaeological. The desecration of graves itself is a major issue, and it's definitely a widespread issue of poverty and our own issues of I'll say crime within communities, and these hotspots with, like, the cable thefts and things. The market is there for these tombstones and things. So it's your moral and ethic. Those type of businesses needs to be shut down to stop these desecrations at the same time to cut out that market based. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you so much for those valuable inputs. As you were talking, and you mentioned the other government departments and the value-based ethics systems that we are operating in, it actually highlights that this is going to require a national effort. And it's not something that's just impacting us as SAHRA at a national level, at a provincial level, and at a local level, as described by Wasifa. It's clearly a problem too. Let me hand over to you, Matita, for a response to Wasifa.
Oh, thank you, Wasifa, for that input. It is certainly, as you've rightly pointed out, there seems to be that general pattern. I can tell you, especially with the ones relating to farmers, especially, the picture that I've put up in Ochis is just one example of where this community had a memory of these graves. And the person who I will not mention there is the farmer that's facing that way is the son. So the old man had respect for those graves and he left them untouched. But when he wanted to increase his production, he just plowed over them, and the community, was highly aggrieved. And we did, to say to him that the law had been broken, and he would have to find a way of. So it is a challenge. You are right. It is basically a challenge for all of us. The CRL Commission, unfortunately, they could not join us, but they are an important component of this particular issue. This is because they have drafted guidelines which they hope will be signed by the representatives of the farming community, I think it's Agri South Africa, which relates to the issue of access to graves, because I think this is a very sticky issue. If you have time, there's actually a case that is online on the, which was on the Supreme Court of Appeal on relating to access to a burial site, with someone wanting to bury someone there and the farmer refusing. But that case becomes important, particularly to us who have to face issues of access every now and then. But the SAHRA Commission has drafted guidelines, which they hope would be signed by the fraternity that relates to agriculture, and then they would then communicate that to their members, because they felt that it was now a pattern that they would receive complaints, and generally from farmers either refusing access or having planted over the graves. And then here is another one, Wasifa. Sorry, I hope I said the name right.
Yeah.
Here is another emerging one, which is very challenging, and it's been on my head, and I hope that I'll be able to go through it. And that's the challenge of informal settlements that get established on graves without the appropriate legislative prescripts being followed. That's another world of quote unquote iniquity that's difficult to go into. But I'm putting together something, and I hope that in future I can present something on it. But there is that, where communities come to an area, there are graves, they simply level the ground, they establish a settlement there, and the families that would normally come and do whatever they need to do there find it difficult to then do their spiritual activities, because those graves, they don't even remember where they were, because there's now a settlement. They may remember by a tree or something, but it then just becomes that vague. Yeah. So there are emergent challenges certainly with that, and I think the conversation has to be much broader, as the previous input indicated as well. Yeah. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you so much. Your input as well, and the response you've given to Wasifa highlights the issue of, you can have a resource which is under threat, but then when you're talking about matters of poverty, inequality, and informal settlements, it brings in other questions, because even those informal settlements are protected by other legislation. I would really love to see your future talks about this. But let's get back to the comments in the chat. As I said, there were a number. Mr. Ross Devereux, I'm not sure if you are still online, but you mentioned the Jacobs community. Would you like to elaborate further on that, Mr. Ross Devereux?
Yes, I'll just go through that site is in an industrial area, although it is flanked on one side by a community cemetery. And it's been had illegal dumping on it. It's had people living on the site under the trees. It's had the theft of the palisade around. Well, there wasn't a palisade to begin with, and then there was a palisade put around it some years ago, because the municipality also just regarded it as a park. But I remember it when the graves were still identifiable. I was very small when I was first taken there. And then the National Monuments Council decided to put up the monument, and we're not sure what was removed from below the ground at the time. So now, with the municipality just thinking that they can use the site as an open space, they were dumping the sand there from a human settlements site that was nearby, and the community got involved and complained. They dragged me in. I complained to the councillor, and then between the owners of the factories around and the logistics companies around, they raised the funds to put up a clear view fence. We don't know how long that Clearview fence will last, because even that fencing is being stolen. So, but we'll see how much it can be protected. And there is there was a move afoot to actually incorporate it in with the community cemetery next door, and try and protect it that way, because otherwise it's an isolated site. The other one, the Merebank one, was being looked after also by local businesses. And Martha used to pay a sort of stipend to them, and they would, a local guy with a garden cleaning service would go and clean there twice a year, and that stopped. So I don't know what direct involvement SAHRA has with those two sites, but we had at Amafa been looking after keeping an eye on those sites. So we're hoping that something will come out of collaboration between Durban museums and Amafa and SAHRA, obviously, and then the War Museum in Bloemfontein. They were also interested in that, when what happens on that site. But we have another problem in that the memorial, the concentration camp, the Maritzburg concentration camp memorial is also in a cemetery that gets desecrated. All the metal has been stolen from the cemetery, or otherwise removed by museum service, which is adjacent to the cemetery. And we have samples of it for record purposes in our materials bank. And the proposal now is that the municipality wants to redevelop the site. So either exhume the graves, or it seems like they just want to remove the tombstones, put them to one side, create some sort of memorial, and sell off the land for development. And that is quite alarming. So we are in the process of provisionally protecting those two cemeteries. But there is a SAHRA memorial within that, the one cemetery.
Wow, fascinating. You know, and the provisional protection of a gravesite, which is not a common occurrence. So I'm very fascinated in that case as well. Madida, you clearly have some information or knowledge about these sites. Please go ahead and give a response. Your microphone is off.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Multitasking.
Thank you, Ben. And thank you to the previous speaker. I just didn't quite catch her name. Yes, we undertook in 2000, and I think it was 2016, basically a countrywide assessment of various concentration camps. And this picture, I think, was taken roughly thereabout, if I remember. Yeah, if not 2016, it was 2017. But we found it in the way that it is. So you are right, there was a palisade. But in our trying to locate this, we at the time were not aware of the involvement, particularly of local heritage institutions. And I think this is a great partnership. This could be a great way of trying to synergize the work that we do as burial grounds and graves, and what the local government is doing, as you are saying, AMAFA, the Provincial Heritage Resources Authority, but also private heritage organizations that have their interest in conserving heritage. So we identified this site. I think we first saw it I first saw it in 2016, as it was. And this picture that you see there, it's in 2022. So I was actually there earlier this year to come and see it, and just to see what has been happening around it. So I think that it would be good to hook up so that we can see how we streamline what we can do. Let me say that SAHRA does intervene on concentration campsites. Of course, there are issues of budget that are concerned, budgetary constraints, but where we can and where the site is under threat, we do intervene. I just gave an example earlier of this one, which is in the Northwest, where people were driving vehicles over the burial, the cemetery. And as you can see on the right, we had to put bollards there to try and prevent that from happening. And the site is basically, as you can see now, almost self-rehabilitated. So we do, within the limited budgetary constraints that we have, do intervene on concentration campsites, and it would be good to partner, that if I can take the quarter of a slice and you take the other quarter, we both make a half, and the work is actually much more complete. So I think that we will get in touch and then start liaising from there. So yes, there is some work that SAHRA is doing on concentration camps, and if budget was more would be able to be done in that front. Yeah, thanks, Ben.
Thank you so much. And you know, as we're unpacking these issues today, I'm realizing that you may need to have a follow-up session, Madida, where you invite a broader audience, the Graves Commission, the provincial authorities, perhaps even SALGA, to have this discussion, because what's coming out here from our colleagues from the provincial authorities, as well as the general comments from other people, is that we need to have a coordinated effort in order to address this issue. It's not a piecemeal issue that's affecting Cape Town or a piecemeal issue that's affecting KZN, Gauteng. There needs to be a coordinated effort and a framework in which the provincial and local authorities are also empowered to deal with this. So thank you so much for those comments. I see your hand, Ms. Malau. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Ben, and good afternoon, and thank you to Mr. Madida for the enlightening presentation, but also very sad reality of the state of management of our graves. And you know, you asked a question, you know, what really has gone wrong. And I don't know if we have one answer to that, but I was just, you know, thinking that, you know, one of the other problems that we are facing is, you know, this uncoordinated growth in urbanization. And because, you know, you are correct to say, you know, we, you know, as in terms of our belief systems and our respect for our departed, we seem to have lost those values. But I was also just reminded of the graves in Duncan village, and where you have informal settlement encroaching into the graves, and one just wonders whether is it you know, because of unplanned growth in terms of urbanization? Is it also maybe because, you know, in the past, you know, graves would be if they were closed graves, they would be closed because there's some relations, some blood relations between those graves and the people that are around the area. So there was that relationship of knowing who is there. Whereas with what we have now, there isn't that relationship in terms of relating to the graves as our own, or as our ancestors, as our people, you know, and wanting to protect that. So you have people who have come in, found an empty land and just occupy it without actually even realizing that, you know, there's somebody there, and because they don't have the relationship with that person, it's sort of like it's okay, you know. And I mean, I remember we would be so scared of graves, like you'd as you walk in the night, you think, you see like a ghost, but, and you wonder if people are like in Duncan Village, like literally you have a house that is like the window, when they open the window, there's a tombstone, and so you wonder, how do these people really sleep? But I think it's also that matter that there is no relationship. So they do not see, those graves as people. For them, they just want a space. But also, as you were mentioning, Ben, the involvement of other stakeholders. I was also just then reminded that I've actually been talking to your CEO, that we have an invitation from SAHRA. They are having a webinar on the 27th of this month. They've requested some presentations from SAHRA, but it was just on 2. And I wonder if, we could not go back to them and also talk to this issue of graves, because that is that's a competency that's supposed to be actually be administered and be looked after by that local authority. Local municipalities and local authorities. So I don't know if colleagues are okay. We could then engage SAHRA so that they give SAHRA also a slot in their program to talk to this matter. Thanks.
Thank you so much. For those that don't know, Ms. Malau is actually from the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture. So for us, we are very happy that even at the highest level, this is something that is being taken into consideration. We have noted your request, and I think Ntate Madida will take that request of yours on board. This is something that I think we do have to address with the local authorities, because they are best suited to manage these sites more so than we are. And again, when we think of this coordinated effort, it will involve engaging in heritage agreements with these authorities as well. So again, Matida, let me bring you back in just to respond to Ms. Malau. Go ahead.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you to Malau for her input. I think, Ben, one of the things which you are basically both scratching where it's itching. We spoke with our executive, I think it was sometime late last year, that we actually need to bring on the table everyone who has a mandate that deals with graves, so that we can all sit down, put our mandates on the table, see where the responsibility goes. Because I think that's where the sort of the challenge is. I'm happy that the CRL Commission has come on board partly, but there would also be a critical sort of partner in this. So I think there is certainly that need. I think we would welcome that invitation to SAHRA. We would participate fully and be involved, because it will assist us as SAHRA, and it will assist the local authorities as well in as far as their responsibilities are concerned. I think that it would be a helpful exercise, definitely, to bring across the board those who have, they don't overlap, but who have mandates that deal with graves, to then talk openly about our mandates, where it begins, where it ends, where a particular authority is supposed to take over, where we can collaborate. I think that is something that is definitely needed, and I think that that suggestion has been taken on board. We will implement it, and meanwhile we'll also participate in other platforms where this is discussed, such as the one that Umemalawa is talking about. And then and then there's just, one point that she made, which I think really is something that perhaps, I don't know how the mother body can help us to sort of start a conversation going with our nation on social cohesion, but in relation to graves in particular, on how they play a role in that sphere. so that maybe we begin to get into the thinking patterns of the people on the ground, etc., etc. You are right, Mayor, that when you walk through a cemetery a while back, it was something that you generally wanted to avoid, doing that. But these days, people they sleep there, they go and drink there, and the question is, what's happening to the thinking? And that conversation might help us. But thank you, Mayor, for your input. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Madida. As I said, you have set this chat room on fire, and I see the conversation is ongoing. But unfortunately, we only have limited time. But one thing that has come out strongly is that we need to have a bigger engagement with all stakeholders, which is agreed. And as Nancy has put so eloquently in the chat, Nancy says, we cannot afford the luxury of working in silos. We need to pool all our resources and stand together to take care of all our heritage in this country. And I think that is the overall sentiment that is coming out of this discussion here today. So thank you so much for all your comments and all your feedback. Madida will try to respond to you. If there's any more input that you'd like to provide, please email Madida and his unit directly. He has put his email in the chat. And with that said, I'll just give another second to see if there's any hands or any further input from everyone before we conclude. And again, you are more than welcome to continue writing in the chat. Heidi, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. And I just want to say a very, very big thank you to everyone's contributions, and especially to Madida for raising this issue. I think this is possibly one of our biggest challenges when it comes to our tangible resources. And it isn't, there's a lot of it happening, and it's very tangible in cemeteries and burial graves, and we're seeing it across the country. Almost every cemetery you go to, there's some issues around the theft of fencing and destruction of graves. But it also cuts across numerous of our heritage resources. And I really, really think that the incorporation of local authorities and the municipalities in SAHRA on board with the maintenance and management of our heritage places is absolutely essential. I think that will go a long way in trying to better manage our heritage resources. So I just wanted to say thank you very much to everybody's inputs, and I'm really excited to hear of possible ways forward, as because it just paves the way for greater cooperation and partnerships with all sectors of government and South Africa. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Heidi. Again, it is truly appreciated. We have noted your comments in the chat as well, and we will definitely try to respond to everyone. But I agree with the sentiment of what you've just expressed. Komi, are you in to just give us an overview and a wrap up of the session before we close?
I am Ben, and thank you. Let me thank the SAHRA colleagues for, is it day 3 of the Heritage webinar series? And as we started this morning, we looked at built environment in a very detailed manner, bringing it to sustainability. And this afternoon, we tackled a more emotive subject of burial grounds and graves. And from the presentations made, you will appreciate how difficult it is to get into people's lives through the graves of their loved ones and try and manage this as heritage resources. The complexities that we are dealing with as South Africa around the developments and the tussle
with managing these heritage resources. And so we really would like to appreciate the participation of everyone in this session and all the comments made, all contributions made. It is exactly what we wanted. The emphasis has been cooperation, multidisciplinary engagements. Let's do it together. And that is exactly what Building Bridges, as we had aimed to do this week, was about. And thank you, everyone. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you so much, Komi. Before you leave, colleagues, could you please just turn your microphones on very quickly? If you could switch your microphones on. Please switch your microphones on. And can we please give a big round of applause to SAHRA's Burial Grounds and Graves Unit for a wonderful, fantastic, and highly engaging session today. Thank you so much, Matthew. Thank you all so much. Have a lovely afternoon further. Please join us for our last day tomorrow. We will be joined by SAHRA's Heritage Protection Unit. Following that is the extremely important strategic coordination workshop, where these types of issues can be solidified within a single plan that SAHRA will be presenting. After that, we'll have our Varsity Vibe Roadshow. So if you're a site manager or a site owner, please join us so that we can get the youth to start visiting our heritage sites. With that said, the session is now closed. Thank you all so much.